Welcome to the session on Expect the Unexpected, preparing for when plans go away. Before we start the session, let me just wish happy birthday to Sigrid here. So let's just join in wishing happy birthday to you, Sigrid. With that, I would start the session and say, this was pretty for us. Plans did go away when we came in here because some of us had the turbulence on the flight, so didn't even know whether we'd make it here. Others, we didn't even know if we had speakers here. So we had the visa rejection letter for nearly everybody that were coming to this session. And then we had to go for a plan B action. That was a quote from the email. So I think we've adapted to this session, and I think rightly so. So all the speakers here know exactly what they're going to talk about. So again, welcome. And the four speakers that'll be here, Ben with market share. I think for those you might have attended his session day before yesterday. So please bear with us if you've seen his slides. But he'll go into some of the studies one study is done for Beam. Then Ms. Win from Catalyst will be talking about her experiences. Kevin will be talking about his experience, and Daniel about his experience with the DFAT Prisma project. So without much further ado, I would hand it over to Ben to talk about the study a bit.
Okay, great. I'm going to go through this quite quickly, just because we've got a lot of people to hear from, but there'll be time afterwards, and we're looking forward to sharing the study pretty soon. To be really brief, it's a study that we are currently in the process of doing for the Beam Exchange that's essentially looking at the issue of adaptive management. A lot of things have been written already from the perspective of implementers. So this study, while it also looks at the implementer perspective, is also really digging down into, from a donor perspective, how do the systems and structures support or not support market systems programming to work adaptively. And so, we've done a lot of different interviews, looked at some of the documentation that's out there, and essentially are trying to figure out, what are some of the key issues that are currently existing that maybe perhaps constraining things, what are some of the good practices that are out there, things that seem to be working, and what are some of the priority investments. So from our findings, from synthesizing all of the interviews, we've seen that the issues kind of boil down into four key buckets. One is around knowledge, particularly knowledge of the rules, the regulations. Another one is leadership, so the ability to drive forward and put into place your vision. Third one is around the culture. And the fourth is the very, procedural procurement and contracting features that have a big influence upon what we do. And I think a lot of the things that we've been hearing here actually influence so many of the other sessions, like the evidence session and whether people use information and so on. Oops. Okay. So just to briefly go through, I'm just going to highlight a few of the perhaps key findings in each of the four buckets. On the knowledge side, one of the things that came out so strongly was that in donor agencies, there's actually a lot of times not complete clarity over what the rules are, even among colleagues. So we held some sessions and actually found that there were people unaware of what their colleagues were doing. And in some cases, not a culture of actually sharing what's possible and what are people actually doing in terms of contracting rules, in terms of what you're allowed to do in structuring your programs. Another key thing is the extent to which there's knowledge of the context that allows programs to manage adaptively. So particularly on the programming side, what kind of learning do you need? What kind of data is being demanded? And does that fit with the information that the projects want to get? And we're going to hear some interesting things from the Catalyst program in a little bit about actually how they addressed both of those issues. We've seen, I think a classic issue that many of you are aware of, the underinvestment in results measurement when it's seen as being an overhead that you have to justify and try and really shrink, and some of the different tools that are out there that you can use. A second area is around leadership. And we saw two forces were essentially were described to us as having really been influencing this. The first one is the political leadership at the top levels of donor agencies that are driving priorities, that are driving demands for things like value for money, justification of spending, and also putting in place things like agency-wide indicators that all projects need to be reporting against. And sometimes those are very large numbers of indicators. But we also see that as important as that is, another really critical factor is the nuts and bolts of who is in place in leadership positions in the project itself. Those people often play such a critical role in determining whether adaptive management can happen, whether your field officers can actually pursue approaches that are adaptive or not. And we're going to hear from Kevin and some of his experiences in actually taking that forward and making that environment occur. A third area was culture. A lot of people describe this to us as being quite emergent, so dependent or created by some of the other factors we looked at, knowledge, leadership, and so on, all help to shape culture. And the culture is at an institutional level, so the implementer, organization, the donors' culture, and then the national culture in which that project is sitting, all having influences on the scope for engaging with as a project team, for trying new things, for being willing to take risks, to fail. So this came out, and sometimes respondents were working, they felt kind of, or aided by the culture, and other times it was kind of pushing against that. So we saw that shaped that. And communication and trust came out as really important aspects that can help to support an adaptive culture. And the Prisma example is, I think, going to give us some examples of a few structures that they use, some institutions that have helped to facilitate that. The final bucket, procurement and contract features, there's a lot here. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the many ways that your contracts help to either enable you to take decisions, to change quickly, or may actually impede that process. So I'm not going to get into all of them. A couple, though, of ones that were quite interesting, where the issue about hiring, who's actually the, yeah, I don't think these bullets are right. Don't know what happened. The hiring, so who is actually in the leadership positions, and what, who's allowed to be in them? So what are the kind of criteria or the point systems that are determining who can be the chiefs of party or the program directors for these projects? And a lot of times you see that there's a pretty standard set of criteria that emphasizes primarily numbers of years of experience or even technical experience within the specific sector or area that the project's looking at. So there's kind of this template that's built, and in a way it's limited the number of people that can be in those positions, and also the extent to which you're getting people with the kind of managerial, adaptive characteristics that could help to drive forward adaptive programming. Here it is. That's the actual one. Okay. So I think, yeah, there's lots of other things, though, too. You know, how overheads are structured, the way that contracts are built in. So whether you have a fixed price contract, payment by results, a lot of these features are things that ultimately have huge implications upon the incentive structures. And as important as any of the leadership characteristics are, and so on, those really drive it forward. So to conclude, and we're looking forward to being able to share this quite quickly, and I think it's going to really draw into what we're about to hear. Tools alone aren't enough. They're one part of the picture, but we often, when we think of adaptive management, are looking for that tool or that framework that we can use. But it's really part of a much bigger picture and a set of institutions. We have seen that results measurement seems to be one of those factors that can be very supportive of this when used effectively. And we were quite enheartened by the fact that there are a lot of adaptive management champions, both at the donor and implementer levels. Although they often don't know about others, and they don't know, who else is out there. So there's kind of a sense of isolation in some cases. And the managerial skills, really bringing that into the structures of our programs and really rewarding the selection and hiring of people who have those capacities, I think, is a really critical one. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pass it on so we can hear some of the specific examples from our colleagues.
So I'm just going to stand around the corner here. Good morning, everyone. So in the past 2 days, I've met a lot of people who, when they heard that I was from Catalyst, had their sort of eyebrows raised, and their response was, wow, you're a great project. You've been very successful. You're quite popular. But today, I think I'm going to share a different story. First, just to give you a snapshot of Catalyst and how big the project is, we are currently in our third phase with a budget of around 32 million, and you can see over time how we have evolved. So I'm going to dig into a story from our fish sector. So in the third phase, moving on from the second phase where we sort of had a geographical mandate to a nationwide coverage in the third phase, we were looking for areas where we could focus more. Focus and see that there were more pro-poor relevance and we could maximize the impact on the poor people. So we commissioned a couple of studies on the common aquaculture activities for small farmers. We had a lot of studies where we did the constraint analysis, we had market analysis, and diagonizing the market system, we intervened strategically. So we had one initial intervention where it was about popularizing high-value species through mass campaign with the feed companies. So from one of the studies, the data supported that aquaculture was definitely on rise, and specifically these high-value species, tilapia, pangash, and koi, had high pro-poor relevance, and there were private sector actors like the feed companies who we could work with in trying to get these poor farmers into the market system. So the theory was that in the immediate season, large farmers would come in as it is a matter of investment, but later after 2 seasons, when the profits are more evident, small farmers would come into the model as well, and we expected that there would be a trickle-down effect. But after 1 year of the pilot intervention, when we went back for the early signs of impact assessment in the field, we found out that there was no stir among the small farmers. The small farmers were not responding, and they were not investing into these high-value species. So basically, we failed. Our hypothesis was wrong, and we were not credible enough to the farmers and not credible enough to the private sector. So we tried to dig in and see what the problem was. So we found out that, we had this theory at the beginning where we thought that the small farmers were not aware of this high-value species, and that is why they were not investing in this high-value species. But what we found out was the small farmers did know about this high-value species, but they did not invest in this because they thought these were input-heavy species. It needed a lot of investment, and it was beyond their affordability. So we gathered those data from the field. We went back to the feed companies, and we said that, okay, so why don't we start training the small farmers on this high-value species? The feed companies disagreed. They denied. They said, there was not, according to the feed companies, there were not enough evidence that these small farmers would be their clientele. These small farmers would invest in this high-value species, and the feed companies just did not want to invest their time and money for the small farmers. So we started thinking of, how to get back and try to fix this. So we had an idea of action research, that is experimentation, just to define what action research actually is in theory. It's studies carried out in the course of an activity to improve the methods and approaches of those involved. So sort of reflective process of progressive problem solving. So in this action research, what we did was we piloted with 15 hatcheries for 1 year. We observed the behavior of small farmers for 1 year, and these groups of small farmers that we were working in the action research were exclusively small farmers, and we selected those small farmers through running PPI, the Progress Out of Poverty Index, to define the target groups. Since it was an action research, we had more control over the target group. So observing their behavior for 1 year, we had fantastic results. From a group of 1,000 farmers, we saw that 70% of the farmers were actually changing their behavior because they were now taught how to culture this high-value species, even though they have small ponds or money around, say, $200 less than $200, they could invest in these high-value species and make profits out of it. So taking those results, we went back to the feed companies. But this time, what we did different was we did not go to the top-tier companies, right? So we left out the top-tier companies. We went to the second-tier companies, the middle-tier companies, who were still struggling for their part of the market share. They were still struggling to find an untapped market where they could invest and get clientele. Because the top-tier companies, they had their market share. They could easily go into the market through working with big farmers and lead farmers. So there was no fighting for their pie of the market share. So we went back to these second-tier companies. They were all in when we had the evidence on board, and they started investing, and we finally had a pilot in 2015. So a lot of you might have questions around, so how did we have a buy-in from the management in terms of the action research? I mean, initially we conducted studies. We had around 2 to 3 studies around aquaculture practices. And then we had a pilot where we failed. Our hypothesis was proven wrong. And then we again wanted to go back to this action research, right? So usually in Catalyst, we have these sector review meetings conducted twice a year, where we review our sector strategies, fix interventions, or change strategies. So in a discussion in the sector review meetings after the early signs of impact assessment, we came up with this idea of action research, given that our head of sectors were suggesting that you need to gather enough evidence so that you can prove it to the private sector. You can be credible enough to the private sector. So the idea of action research was pitched there. And from MRM, we had inputs that, okay, so why don't you try out the PPI to select these groups and make sure that you have more control over the target groups, and you have more evidence gathered around these target groups. You have tested results. So that's sort of how we got the buy-in from the action research. And as you may, and basically we have sort of a very productive culture around Catalyst, a very participatory culture from higher management to the teams that are working. We discuss together, and we try to solve the problems together, actually, rather than they being more directive towards us. They're like very responsive to these discussions. So this is actually how the intervention now looks like. I'm just going to give you some data. We conducted an early signs of impact assessment again in around January 2016 on the final intervention last year. And we have already got evidence that 11,000 farmers have benefited from this intervention. It was carried around a smaller sample. And there was an average income increase per farmer of Taka 21,000, which is around approximately $270 per season. So this was all incremental income. In the initial action research, we coupled up with 15 hatcheries, and at the end of 2015, we saw crowding in from 57 hatcheries in the regional level. And we have now on board with us 3 big aquachemical companies and 5 big feed companies. So now moving on to the next slide, again, you might have questions. How do the donors respond to such kind of adaptation? So basically, looking at the donors, so we have the donor consortium, we have Catalyst management, and we have the implementation team. So the donors, in our case, are more involved in managing contracts. For example, managing the fiduciary risk and the reputational risk of the project. And they're more focused on what is the bigger level change that the project is delivering, and what is the quality of analysis around gathering evidence and evaluation. What they're not involved in is how Catalyst runs the implementation. That's solely lies to the Catalyst management and the implementation team. They're not involved in micromanagement of each sector, and they're more responsive to our strategies, and less directive. I mean, they could create an environment where Catalyst could take a lot of risk. They maintained a learning approach all throughout, and due course of time, Catalyst adopted new approaches, and we have been innovative as a result. So they understood the dynamic context of markets and factors which were beyond project control, and that not all interventions will be successful. And the donors really understood that. They understood the context. They allowed us to try. So ending my presentation, I don't have a sort of ending quote because, well, I think when you talk about adaptive management, I get a bit lost. I mean, I don't know whether this is adaptive management or active or passive management. I really don't know. What I can say is this was good management. Thank you.
Thanks, President. We'll take questions in the end, but I'd just like to say we're also, because in the end we have, the structure we have is there'll be some discussions around some of the key questions that have come from the presentation. We have 3 questions that we think that has come out of the presentation. Because looking at the size now, again, trying to adapt, we think we need 1 more question. Because there are 4 groups. I think we thought there would be 3. So I guess speakers were so imminent, everyone wanted to come here. So if you think you want to discuss any question on adaptive management or good management, as was just talked about, can you just have 1 question, anything? We'll just collect, and Ashley will collect those questions. We'll see which, and we'll just throw out 1 other question. So anytime between the next 2 presentations, just have that question, we'll just take it up, and then in the end, throw it back to you for the group work. Over to you, Kevin.
Okay, and in fact, just to speed it up, I don't even have an introductory slide. You've seen it already, so. Okay. So expect the unexpected. What are we going to cover in this short presentation? Just a brief description of GEMS 1, what is it expected to achieve, the progression of the program in relation to changes in the external environment, and basically a few examples on trying to illustrate the principles of adaptive management. We've let these in, and when you get the print out of the thing, you'll be able to sit at your leisure. So GEMS 1 was looking at the meat and leather sector. Originally, I think it was imagined that they were related, but once you kill the animal, the meat goes this way and the leather goes that way. In Nigeria, it's a little bit different because in Nigeria, people eat the leather as a delicacy called pomo. So quite a few people joke that the Nigerians, are eating their shoes, but they're not. They're eating very, very nutritious leather. So the sector in Nigeria is absolutely massive. 1 out of every 4 Africans is a Nigerian. That's the first statistic you need to know. Secondly, the rarest thing in the world is a vegetarian Nigerian. Very rare. So, very big and rich nation. You may not believe that, but it really is. And basically, the mass importation of livestock. They walk in from Mauritania. We've even had cases of camels arriving in the abattoir in Kanu that have come all the way from southern Sudan. So it is massive. And I always like to think of that idea that if you understood that if you look at the livestock industry in Africa, you can look, Nigeria, a big consumer of meat, pulling it all in is actually funding the livelihoods of poor people in the Sahel, maybe 5 or 6 additional countries, even though it's only in Nigeria. So the sale and transport of livestock from the border to the main consumption centers, which are the oil industry in Port Harcourt and the massive mega city called Lagos, are completely controlled by traditional butchers. So right from the beginning, we decided, don't bang your head against a traditional brick wall. So we actually, all the slaughter of animals, disposable of the product is all done Sharia compliant. All abattoirs in the country are Sharia compliant, even down in the south where you have Christians, mainly. And basically, that value of the industries, question mark, question mark, question mark, we estimate somewhere between 7 and 12 billion US a year. It's massive. But we decided that we wouldn't try and do anything to influence it in 5 years. There's a traditional role of fattening livestock. People fatten livestock for the main holiday, Salah. Unbelievably, and in Salah, in 1 week of the festival of Salah, we estimate between 25 and 40 million goats and sheep get slaughtered. It's, And that, of course, is when all the leather arrives. So we looked at a situation where we could actually improve the productivity of traditional feeding by deworming the animals, taking the ectoparasites off them, making sure that they gave them water. The belief in Nigeria is if you give a goat water, it bloats its stomach up. Goats only do that if they don't know they're going to get water in 2 hours' time. If they just think they're going to have a little bit, they bloat their stomach up. So we did a pilot project on it, and incredibly viable. You could really increase incomes by doing this simple thing. Secondly, we particularly liked it because women are involved in fattening of animals. So we also looked at the whole meat processing thing. We looked at trying to improve hygiene in the meat and leather industry, in the meat industry in terms of slaughter. And what we did is we linked the production of meat. We decided not to work in the big traditional abattoirs. We started working with private abattoirs and linking these private abattoirs with maybe cooling facilities so they could hang the meat for a bit. We linked them direct to Master Meats. Master Meats has the franchise to supply all the meat to ShopRite. And what's happening, this is again an adaptive management, where you can target what's happening economically. The fastest growing sector in Nigeria is the formal supermarkets. Their growth, 8% per month. Master Meats we're here in Zambia, it's a very interesting thing. Master Meats is what the international name is, but here they're called Zambeef. And they also supply all the meat for ShopRite. So we linked these abattoirs, and we persuaded Master Meats, who originally thought they'd set up their own ranch and slaughter their own meat, that in fact it was much easier to contract other people slaughtering meat. So, the leather industry, quickly. The leather industry, and if you want to go and look through certain articles in the British press, this unfortunately was picked up by them, where the typical British press got the wrong end of the stick. There is an export expansion grant in Nigeria. If you export leather, you get a 30% subsidy. Ha, you think. That's a nice way to develop a business. But hey, unfortunately, what happened in Nigeria, someone realized that all you needed was a stamped certificate that you had exported something. And if you brought the money back, it must mean that you had exported and sold it, and then you got 30% when it came back. In fact, it's called money laundering. So you bring money back, you get 30% from the government, pretty good deal, but in fact, we actually identified this as a problem and then decided we wouldn't get involved, mainly because of the level of the corruption was enough to get you, well, I wouldn't be here. So, how did we adapt as we went along? We were sitting one day peacefully in January 2012 when next second Boko Haram hit the heart of Kano, Nigeria's second largest city. They nearly blew the roof off my house. I was sitting very scared in the bathroom when the roof jumped up and all the tiles fell off. I thought it was the end of me. But anyway, it wasn't. And so what we did is we quickly switched our activities from working in Kano, because we'd done a study and we'd looked at the main shoe cluster in Nigeria is in Aba, in the southeast. So we quickly shifted our staff down there. Certain of our staff are here today. Were forced to go and live in Lagos and stay at home and work from home. It didn't really work that well. But anyway, it sort of did it. We discovered that the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development was very committed to agricultural transformation agenda. We put my technical director in as an advisor at the ministry. We hired a consultant to look at small livestock, and suddenly we had the ear of the minister, and we had total access to the entire process of agricultural transformation agenda. Because we're related to the minister and we have very good touch with him, we got a NERSAL loan, which we put a loan through our business membership organization, a real value chain loan. So the money was used by the association to lend to skin buyers. The skin buyers then gave it to the small tanners. The small tanners gave it to the leather makers. They gave it to the shoemakers. They gave it to the belt makers. And this actually generated so much income that we decided, what we'll do, we'll ask for an extra output called access to finance. Hey, listen, if there's results going, make sure they're part of your scoring system. Okay, so despite the additional success of the ATF, we had a situation we got a 75% loan guarantee, we had a 15% support from the International Finance Corporation, and the people were going to get had to put down a 20% deposit. That's 110% coverage of the loan, and the commercial bank wouldn't jump in the swimming pool with us. So, in the end, we ditched access to finance and took it out. So, this is about adaptive management. The idea that your log frame is totally rigid is wrong. If you can argue a convincing case with people, it really does flexible. So our advocacy, as I mentioned, in leather, had identified this very, very big fraud with the Export Expansion Grant. We became very unpopular with the Tanners Council, which were the main people doing the exporting. And hey, we estimate that after we started advocating about the corruption of the EEG, the corruption dropped from 2.2 billion in 1 year to a more manageable 60 or 70 million the year after. And we didn't claim any of that as one of our results. Okay. So we had potential benefits of having improved leather. So we originally imagined that if we could stop at the time in the leather industry, all the leather was exported. So if you export all the leather, you got 30% above the world market price. So no one who had made shoes in the country could buy Nigerian leather. In fact, if they wanted Nigerian leather, they had to go to Italy and buy offcuts from the leather industry in Italy to bring them back. And we'd originally imagined that this was going to be a massive contribution to our outputs. It wasn't. In fact, in the end, we combined finished leather goods with finished leather. So at the end, then, we offered DFID an expansion of project activities into 3 additional states in the north with feed finishing activities, and we secured a budget increase of about 50%. So once we'd identified the vehicle that we could drive our results with, this was it. And this is a kind of the individual example of how adaptive management works. So at the start of the project, we actually hired a feed company. We provided it with technical assistance to produce small ruminant feed. Previously, there'd been none available. And we actually paid for 30 tons of it to be manufactured. Now, this really isn't an M4P program, you could say, because we weren't working with a private sector partner. But sometimes you have to show the private sector partners that there's an advantage. So the first pilot was unsuccessful. We conducted an area close to Kanu, well, you know, because we didn't want to spend 4 hours driving to the site. Unfortunately, this is an area that had been rather disturbed by USAID program. When we started working there, we asked, this is one of the other problems of donor problems. So when we first worked there, everyone said, yeah, we got lots of women who've got goats. When we had a list of 485 women who were going to participate. We were so excited. We hit our gender target about everything. When we finally went back to look at the pilot project, they all thought we were going to give the woman a goat. You know, the idea that, no, this is your goat. We're just going to teach you how to feed it properly. So right at the beginning, my gut feeling was to cut it down. I mean, I entered the program after the first year of implementation, and this had been designed by a non-M4P specialist who was a brilliant livestock specialist. So it was like, this is too complicated, because you have to have the water and the feed and the chopped crop waste, etc. It's miles too complicated. But then we moved to an area where feed finishing is already practiced. We had increased uptake. And the moment we had an increased uptake, the feed companies were interested. They were not interested if they thought it was going to be a 30-ton one-off. Okay, so paravets got involved because they had to do this induction. They had to vaccinate the animal and deworm it, etc. So we had these local paravets who were part of the government extension service and who did private work after work and during the weekend and during work hours as well. But anyway, that's a Nigerian government problem, not ours. But what happened is they very quickly started making money. They became small businesses. They were buying trucks. They were hiring people. We added pen feeding of large ruminants because they wanted good meat from master meats. And very quickly, of course, you know that a cow eats about 15 times more food than a goat. And so by project end, we had 30 feed companies making and marketing small ruminant things. And basically, the meat in ShopRite, 8% per month, still growing. By the end of next year, we will have something like 50 or 60 ShopRites in Nigeria. And guess who's arriving? Walmart, in the form of game. But so it became a major portion of our overall project results. So what do we learn as a management? The key bit is to keep your eye on your log frame targets. If you get behind the curve, you're finished. All of you should learn what the logarithmic formula is. If your results do this, it's a log thingy, and you can actually calculate. If this is how many you need at the end, you can calculate every single quarterly report back to year one. And if you do that, you straight away, every quarter, you realize, hey, we're behind, we're going to have to catch up. And because you're doing it for each output, you very quickly realize where you've got to spend your money. Learn to let people down easily. When we were working on the finished leather goods, one of the people in this room here, his favorite project was developing technical training for people making shoes. And basically, we end up saying, look, James, we're going to have to drop this. and I think that's it. So and we said, like, James, I promise you, if you move now down to the southeast, it may benefit your career, which it did, because now he works for PIN Foundation and lives in Awry. So it's a very important thing, a skill, making sure that you can convince your staff that the interests of the program are their interests. And if you can't do this, and if you can't do the following, devote a lot of effort to building a team, it's how you deliver. I've got a great belief, okay? If you're going to run a program, you live where the program's running. This idea of off-site management, living in Abuja, popping up, or living in Abuja and popping down to the Delta like's happening at the moment, this just doesn't work. If you're not there in the bar, meeting the buyers, chatting to your people who are the guys you're meant to be working with. So, final bit, keep light on your feet, make sure you can jump when you should, run when you can, and know how to hold your ground. Okay, thanks for listening. Private interaction on the subject's encouraged. Come and ask me what I think about your problems.
Thanks, Kevin. Then finally, we'll have Daniel. Now I'll come from the donor perspective. Now we've listened to the practitioner perspective. Well, donor practitioner perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Rajiv. So I'm going to present here a model of expecting the unexpected through an adaptive management model. So in my presentation, I will talk about mainly three things. The first thing about the AIP Rural, the project itself. I think everybody knows about Catalyst, but not necessarily what AIP Rural is. Probably people know about Prisma. I'm going to explain a little bit what's there. Secondly, I talk about the model, the adaptive model I'm going to present, this secretariat model, and then in the last part, a little bit about practical instruments, what we do in reality in operational terms, yeah? Basics about AIP Rural. In Indonesia, this is, it's the largest archipelago in the world, 16,000 islands. Maybe I've been to, 10, 20 islands only, so 15,000 plus still waiting. 250 million people, meaning they're the fourth most populous country in the world. I don't know whether people know that. But and AIP Rural is funded by the Australian government, around 112 million Australian dollar for about 6 years, from 2012 to 2018. Now, the program is designed actually for 10 years period of time. So this is still the first phase of the program. And then this program is focusing on the eastern part of Indonesia, the red ovals here. Basically, those are the poorest areas. They are very much dependent on agriculture sector, and also the driest part of Indonesia. When I say dry, it means that around 1,500 millimeter precipitation rate a year, because the other part of the country is 2,500 up to 3,000. So that's what I meant by dry, a little bit different, unlike in Africa. Yeah, so the basics of the program goal is to create 30% net income increase for around 300,000 smallholder farm households by December 2018. Now, to be honest, this is like my very first program that has set the program goal at an impact level and very explicit about the number. Because in many other programs I'm working for, yeah, you create like better competitiveness, better business enabling environment, you create growth, but doesn't specify so specific, doesn't specify explicitly what you mean by the goal. And I think this is a very challenging program goal. AIP Rural is an umbrella program, so it's like it's actually a DFAT construct of 4 different programs. Prisma, which probably people know more, is the main project, well, we call it project under AIP Rural. It has a commodity approach, so it looks into commodities and find sectors where you can find poorer farmers and where you can find opportunity to increase net income and where you can find pretty active private sector players there, but also public sector. ARISA is more about agriculture innovation, but is more about the applied innovation. So meaning not basic research, but more around commercialization of innovation and research. Tirta is talking about tertiary irrigation, so this is not mainly about dams or large irrigation canals or network, but it's more about the tertiary means that the last mile of irrigation services to the smallholder farmers. And Safira is more about agricultural finance. Okay, so that is just to give you a quick overview about AIP Rural. Now, this is where I would like to start my presentation. I don't know this quote where it comes from, but I keep remembering this quote. We had a great strategy, we had a great plan, but we lost the battle. Anyone knows? Nobody knows. Or maybe that's my own quote then. Nokia. Well, they lost the battle, exactly. Yeah, okay, good. They had a good plan, they had a good strategy, but they lost the battle. Okay, good. Well, that's reality probably. Well, Nokia said that they do not know why they failed at the end of the day. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that the secretariat model started with an acknowledgement, understanding that things will not run smoothly in the project, right? From the very beginning, we realized that things will go wrong, and rather than saying that we will just deny that, or we're in the constant denial phase, we said, okay, let's build a model to be able to anticipate and to do damage control when things go wrong, right? Now, in the context of Indonesia, M4P approach is a very new approach. Most of the projects are doing direct delivery, and M4P is a non-direct delivery project, both for the donor, for the government, but also for the private sector. So I don't think there's much happening in terms of market development approach there. So what it means is that there are a lot of risks and uncertainties connected to the global market system. Indonesia is the 16th largest economy in the world. So it means that it's not like a small economy, it's a very big economy, and imports, export policy, vested interest, corruption, and so on, it's there, right? And when we talk about markets, different to other direct delivery projects, where you can control, like from the very beginning, I want to train 1,000 people. I want to give, 20 groups of micro saving group loan or something like that. You can say that in direct delivery model, but in an M4P model, you cannot say that. And this is something new that you need to make the donor understand, but also the government of Indonesia. It is also clear that from the very beginning that both on the Australian government and the Indonesian government, there are a lot of changing policies and interests. Sometimes you get a pro-market type of government, sometimes you get a socialist type of government who is saying that let's start doing autarky policy in Indonesia, like absurd things and so on and so forth. And those key players are, they keep changing. Rotation at the minister level, at the first secretary level, and so on. It keeps happening. So you have to be able to cope with those dynamics. Now, this is more or less the model what I want to present here. So, in a conventional traditional model, usually you will have only the donor in interaction directly with the projects. In our model, between the projects and the donor, you have the so-called AIB Rural Secretariat. There are 4 people there. Myself as the program director, Jim Domega as senior advisor, and 2 other senior managers. Now, why is this secretariat model, so to say, important, or let's say, why is it of value here? Number one, when we talk about the context, the Indonesian government is probably a little bit different from many other governments who basically say to development projects like, I don't care what you guys are doing, as long as you are not, disturbing our political process, as long as you're not challenging me, as long as you, do good things, I will let you go, I don't know whether in your country it's like that way, but that is absolutely not in Indonesia. In Indonesia, the government wants to get involved into the project. They want to know what you are doing there. They want to know whether what you're doing is contributing to their policy objective. They want to know, even sometimes when we are traveling traveling overseas, what are you doing there? So why are you spending so much money for X, Y, and Z? So this is the context we are dealing with. And then the secretariat, one of the functions is to be able to communicate what the projects are doing to the government. Right? What is the importance? So let's say the government of Indonesia is very interested into livelihood development, right? Now, of course, being in the market-based approach camp, we would like to advocate for our approach. Now, how to find a good way of integration? How to find a good way of communication? How to promote the learning from their side so that they understand that sustainability does matter, and scale up and so on and so forth. So that is the first function of the secretariat. We know that if this is not managed well with the Australian government as well, the government of Indonesia can just say to the project, okay, from tomorrow, please pack your bags, go back to your home country. That has happened to several other projects. So this is the type of uncertainty and risk we have to deal, and we deal this through the AIB Rural Secretariat model. The next thing is about portfolio management. Portfolio management basically is more about, let's say, what type of what sectors do you want to work in? Do you want to take the larger sectors only where you get multinational companies, or do you want to take the smaller sectors, which may not be so important for the nation, but it's probably important for the district where you're working in. So the choice of sectors in your portfolio, the risk, and so on. That is also another function of the secretary. Now, why I say this? Because in reality, for example, for DFAT, the donor, like women sectors, female-dominated sectors are very important. Now, if you do not reflect that in your portfolio, then you will not have enough to say when an audit comes or when a review is happening. So the secretariat here is providing guidance to the projects that you have to take care of the female-dominated sector, you have to take care of the environmental aspects, disability, and so on and so forth. The next part is about program management, and this is like based on real life experience. You know that, the first year of any project inception, you got a lot of fighting and problems and disagreement, and it's basically the storming phase of the project, right? Now, the secretariat provides guidance and short-term capacity gap, kind of supporting, filling the short-term capacity gap. For example, some of the mid-level management, for example, they need some mentoring, they need some capacity building. So then the secretary can provide, temporary support just to get the process of storming in the year one, done quickly and pretty, and not too much damaging. And the last bit is about trust building and communication. Now, I'll explain about that later. Now, our policy is honesty is the best policy. This sounds so naive, probably, for some people, but we think that, throughout the 3-4 years we had in our project, we see that this is actually a very much, a much better basis to build trust among the donor, the projects, but also the government. If things are not going well, you need to be frank about it. You need to discuss it. Of course, not discussing in the sense that we got a problem, we cannot solve this. But you come with problem, you come with some potential solution, and discuss and engage with them. And the sooner they know that things are going wrong, the easier for them to accept when things go wrong. Okay, good, yeah. And secondly, when we talk about adaptiveness and so on, I mean, it's important to make sure that whatever you want to adapt in the project must be embedded in the contract as well. Because otherwise it will be an uphill battle. You want to change it, and people will say, no, procurement said it's like that. Because in the contract it's not said that it should be like this or like that. So, for example, the fact that our intervention will have 30% failure rate, we build that in the contract of the projects. We acknowledge that upfront. So even like the high-level policymakers from Australian government, Indonesian government, they know this upfront, that not all of our interventions are going to work. So it helps us not to lie when those things do not work. Secondly, in the contract, we also put the fixed project goal, and to some extent, some project outcomes there. So those things are fixed, but all of the others, let's say, what is about the output, what's about the outcome, and so on and so forth, we put them in a preliminary milestone table, basically showing where you are right now up to the target, what things you have to achieve, right? But down the track, you have to iteratively adjust and update the milestone table. Last part, Rajiv? Yeah. And this is another instrument that we are using. This is what we call the semester performance target and incentive. Now, in a project setting, usually you will have the goal, like by 2018, 300,000 farmers and so on and so forth. But each semester, you have to be able to present your results, right? You have to be able to convince your donor that things are working well. Now, how to do that is, of course, that you have to break down your targets into outputs and outcome indicators, step by step over the 3-4 years or 4-5 years. And then slowly, each semester to the next semester to the next semester, you are moving your target from output level, things you can pretty well achieve, into the outcome level, things where you are a little bit, shaky sometimes, not being able to influence everything. And then this semester performance target incentive, where we have the project right now, they also have some performance incentive, combined with those targets. It gives the it's kind of like to sweeten the deal, or kind of like giving a nice candy. If you do the extra mile and you achieve that, then you get this extra bonus. It's not that big, but at least it's substantial. Yeah. And the last part is that the semester performance target and incentive is discussed by between the secretariat and the projects. And then when it's ready, then you discuss it with the donor. Now, the reason why we say this is because sometimes donors will have different contracting representative or contracts manager, project manager. Sometimes they do not have any idea about M4P, whatever it is. So that the task or responsibility of the secretariat is to explain that to whoever is new and coming to the project, so that the communication can be maintained well. Thank you very much, Rajiv.
Thank you, Daniel. I think it's a different model, and I was with Prisma with Daniel, and it has worked quite well. For the first year, there was problems in the project, but I think that whole model has really helped steer the project. And for DFAT in Indonesia, at least, it's considered one of the key projects. And then it has really turned the belief for DFAT, where they were non-believer, even in DFAT Indonesia, where they didn't believe that this process would really work. But now, strong believer with the ambassador, everyone visiting the field. I think you have a deputy ambassador visit coming very soon. So yeah, thanks a lot. I think we have half an hour, so we will, I didn't say any questions, but that's fine. We have 3 questions with us. Did anyone have a question that you want to discuss? You want to discuss, or you want to ask the panel? All right, what we can do is then, okay. What we can do is maybe take 10 minutes, just direct questions to the speakers here, and then after that we can go into a quick group work to handle some of the questions that we think that needs to be discussed.
My interest has been very much in the people dimension of this. I work with 3 different market system projects, and all of them are quite different. One of those teams is here, so I'm not particularly going to talk about them, as that's a very new relationship. But what I found is that, exactly as I think Ben pointed out, leadership and culture seem to come across very strongly in terms of how the team progresses. We're operating in very thin markets, and sometimes the teams really struggle when they come up against progress barriers. One of our teams is very good at coming up with lots of ideas, but sometimes they're not very strong ideas. And the other team has been finding it much more difficult. So I'm really interested to hear people's contributions on how you actually can address some of those kind of human elements and team elements. So it's more a broad question, but the panel might also want to comment on that.
Max?
Okay, thanks to the presenters for a very exciting presentations there. I think when we talk of adaptive management, requires a lot of fluidity, a lot of quick decision making, requires ability to actually move from one direction into another relatively quickly, because there are business timelines to be met. I wonder whether you have any advice how that can be done, taking into account that behind what you are doing, there is a contractual arrangement between the donor and the contracted agency, and then there is another layer of relationship between the project implementing team or the secretariat for that matter and the private sector that you are dealing with. How do you manage those relationships to actually be as adaptive as you are suggesting?
Is that correct to do anyone specifically?
No, he knows my view.
Yeah, okay, sure. Okay, so thank you very much. How to do that? First of all, of course, the contract, whatever, when it's signed, then it should specify that, that adaptive management flexibility is given in the contract, and that's the reason why only the goal is fixed, but all of the other elements are not fixed, right? Now, when it comes to the operationalization, you talk about the private sector partners. I think the project has the liberty to design different engagement contractual arrangement with any partner. It can be in the form of a grant, it can be a service order, it can be a memorandum of understanding, or what we call parallel financing. So you pay for your bits, we pay for our bits. And those things are actually, the principles are, let's say, endorsed by the donor, right? So that you have different modalities of engagement, it's approved by the donor. But in reality, the operationalization and so on, it's up to the managing contractor, to the implementation team. Now, I think that's the principle. Number two, I think sometimes it's all about communication. Of course, we have to make decision pretty quickly. And then if you feel that things are not working well, and then you inform that both to the management of the project, but also upwards to the donor. According to our experience, we haven't seen any problem with that, because if you inform them early enough, then heads up, kind of like heads up. So when the time comes and then there's a approval, approval request, we want to change X, Y, and Z, A, B, C, then usually the resistance or the inquiry or the scrutiny is not that big. So at least that's my yeah.
But I'll come to Sigrid and then one more. Maybe I'll just take three and then we go into the group work if that's okay, and we can take the question. But the report is going to come out in 3 weeks' time, you said? Yeah, by the end of the month. By the end of the month, the report will be out. Beam has end of next month. By June, Beam and Ben's group has done an excellent report. The market share has done on adaptive management, and they'll be out by the end of next month, right? And there are some people, I've heard in the room, or at least were in the conference, that really, appreciated what was in the report. Okay, Sigrid, yeah.
No, thank you very much for all the three presentations. I think especially for the level of project managers, it's really, I can really recognize my day-to-day challenges in all these three. My question is how to promote really this failure admitting or celebrating even habit at different levels with this performance incentives. Because as well in my team, but also towards donors, with different implementing agencies, how can you really promote this to really admit and be honest about failures?
Thank you, Sigrid. That's one of the questions we'll have in the group right now. So we'll discuss, and one of the facilitators will be with you. Sorry, I'm not trying to not let them answer, but that is the group work right now. Is that okay? Okay. Sorry, Sigrid, about it. And the last question here.
So my question is quite linked to what Collins just asked, which is basically in the environment where we are living, where we have got results-based contracts. And with the results-based contracts, you've got almost like activity level kind of tracker indicators that you need to be hitting to get your payments, obviously. And in that environment, how do you continue to be adaptive when these contracts are negotiated way before implementation even starts?
I think Daniel has the experience.
If I were you, probably I wouldn't sign that contract. That's my first answer, because in reality is that we got the same complaint from other like implementing partners, smaller studies and so on. They say like, you put us into this, you lock us into this system, things have changed. I said like, if you know that was a problem for you for the very beginning, why didn't you say so? So it's like, okay. But anyway, you sign the contract, it has happened. I don't know, maybe contract negotiation will be the only way to do that, because as long as it's written, schwarz auf weiß, it's like black and white, then not much actually you can do. If, let's say, even you get a good project manager from the donor side, say, yeah, I'm willing to do that, but there's a contract breach anyway. So without the renegotiation of the contract and different terms, I don't think that can happen. Yeah.
Because I've been involved in Matthew has a classic problem, and I've recently been doing some work with a program in Nepal, who are having trouble trying to explain their hockey stick results, etc. It comes down to one thing: do someone in the donor community not read the news? Have you heard about El Nino? Have you heard that it's the worst drought in Central Africa's living memory? Have you heard that most of the little irrigation schemes in Nepal were fed from streams that came out of the Himalayas? There's been an earthquake, So it's this amazing inability to relate what's actually happening on the ground to this rigidity of results. I mean, there's no way anyone is going to get results in Zimbabwe this year. I mean, it's the worst drought ever. And equally, if you had your growth potential in your project in Nepal was based on small-scale irrigation, you can forget it. Some of the canals were 1,500 years old. They are broken. And the water no longer arrives at the irrigation scheme. So there's no way you can get the yields you promised.
Yeah. All right. Contract amendment.
Okay, contract amendment. Thanks a lot, Sigrid. I hope we'll get to your question, I think. I'll just get to the group work. So I think I know there are other questions, but let's take that. There will be also, the panel will be there in one of the groups. So there are 4 groups that we do want to, just have quick discussion, maybe around 15 minutes. I know that's not enough. We thought it would be around 25. But essentially, just to discuss 3 questions in the groups. The first will be discussing what are factors hindered projects to go through a testing phase, probably looking at failures as well. So that question, the measurement would be there with the group. Maybe that group can stay in this table, whoever is interested in that, and answer those questions. Your facilitators will go through that. They have the questions with them. So just around a 15, 20 minutes discussion. Second, what Daniel, and that was measurements presentation. Daniel has presented the secretariat model. I know it's for big projects. Is that a good option? Are there other options? And it's really because it's a knowledge network, for BEAM also to take up some of the ideas that come. Does it need further discussion? Because we do want to aid the donor industry also to understand what the practitioners are saying. Third one would be what Kevin has mentioned. He didn't go in detail into that, but how do you retain this momentum? There's team leader changes, there's management changes. The new team leader comes and says, I don't agree with any of the decisions that have been made. Or even the sector teams, they say everything is, we don't agree to that. How do you ensure that the momentum is carried on in the project? So that would be Kevin leading that. So maybe we'd have a measurement here with the first one. Second, Daniel could be there with the secretariat there, and Kevin could be here. And the fourth one, Ben, on the human side of the team. How do you motivate the team? So maybe if you could just go to one topic that you're interested in, and around your facilities will be with you. They'll tell you what exactly to do. Thanks a lot.
All right. Challenges we talked about, red tape or bureaucracy can squash innovation, flexibility, and adaptiveness. Changes in team leadership can stunt progress. Some teams generate new ideas, but those ideas are not quite good enough, and some teams struggle just to generate ideas at all. So then we have some recommendations, each of which could be unpacked, but I'm just going to read them out. Importance of coaching and mentoring, structures and incentives, team building, the art of management, not just the science of it. Kill the lawyers, which is one way of saying trying to cut through the red tape. So given to us by a lawyer, quoting Shakespeare nonetheless. You have to invest in your team. It's also important to think about recruiting the right team. And then at the end, leadership is essential in order to get the team to work well.
Thanks a lot. Can we go to the next team again? 1 minute.
Yeah. So how can donors be supportive to a failure culture? In the first place, donors should be encouraged to encourage the sharing. But there is also a problem with the competitive culture between implementers, and so there should also be a change in the competitive structure in that sense. There should be some flexibility despite the lock frame. One solution is to have targets at aggregate level, so if one sector doesn't reach it, then another sector can do it. And dialogue with the donor during the whole planning and implementation phase. And there should be also a fostering of learning culture within the teams. So that depends on the manager's leadership. There should be a message from the start that M4P actually allows for failures, and there should also be very much space for dancing and for making failures, so that people can really take that space. So that's it.
One more?
One more? And BEAM's role, in the first place, policy and advocacy, case studies on failures and learning, promoting a platform to share the experience and capitalize on learnings.
Thanks a lot, Sangeet. Thanks a lot to the group. Collins here.
All right.
1 minute.
Our group said that, yes, the model of having a secretariat could be fine, but that model would only work well where the program has several large components. It would also work better if it is having a very clear mandate. And in our view, the mandate should be around coordination, being a communication gateway, and also being an advocate of the program to the various, but it should not be a decision-making unit. Then we have also said that in smaller programs, there are things like the PMU, Board of Directors, that can take decisions similar to this. So what is required is a unit that actually facilitates rather than become another layer of bureaucracy in the system.
Thanks a lot, Collins. Okay. Yeah, the last one. Interesting, very interesting points. Yeah.
For our group, we're trying to answer the question, how do you maintain momentum of implementation with changes in management? And we thought that documentation of decisions is critical, and it is not just process. It is not just for the purpose of documenting the process, but actually to make sure that there is a record of decisions that were made. We also said we need to go beyond just turning institutional, having institutional memory in people's heads, but actually turning institutional memory into written records. We also discussed about anticipating changes and preparing for them. We also discussed about sharing information on decision making, sharing of information and decision making with the wider team. That's both implementation and the donor team also makes a big difference. We also said the role that BEAM can play, obviously with contractors as well, is talking to donors about risks and rewards. And we also thought that BEAM can also act as a repository of information for projects.
Thanks a lot. I think really good ideas have come. Sorry, the discussions are a little short. We have to cut short. We have to get into the next session. Thanks a lot, everybody, and thanks especially to Ben, Mezbin, Daniel, and Kevin for their honest opinions of what has happened in the project. So I think I found that really enriching myself. Thanks a lot.